The other day, I went to Faraday Market to go buy impebo. It's usually the only thing that I ever buy there, and it always strikes me just how many different kinds of meat are there. There are stalls everywhere with all sorts of roots and plants. And there are those matalas who grind plants for healers, and there's always that odd lady who sits in her stall and just stares at you in jail. And then there are some really bizarre things as well that hang on lines draped across entrances of other smaller stalls. Talking about African spirituality and all its different facets is all fun and games until the topic of Umuthi comes up. I'll be honest with you, the idea of Umuthi has always freaked me out. I think most of us grow up with a deep-seated fear of ditlhari. It is really difficult to say why exactly this is the case, but there's always been a sense of darkness that surrounds the idea of African Indigenous medicine. Perhaps it speaks to how well colonialism has worked in terms of alienating black people from ancient African knowledge systems. I mean, we never really question Western medicine in any real way. I mean, sure, there are people who are now going against the COVID vaccine, but then again, many of those people have kids who have been fully immunized and vaccinated from the time that they were small babies. But in general, almost anything that is classified as Umuthi creates an ominous sense of danger. The uMhlonyane craze that came with the first lockdown didn't really change much in terms of this perception either. So in part 3 of the Practicing African Spirituality for Beginners series, we will be dealing with Understanding Umuthi. What exactly is Umuthi? What is its function in terms of our physical as well as our spiritual well-being? To answer these questions and others, I spoke to uMkhulu Mahlalentabeni, who is an elder and an experienced healer and a kobela. For a lot of people, the question of immunity and cleansing is a very uncomfortable one because it brings across there's something dark about it. You know, okay. There's a lot of our contemporary understanding of immunity is premised on a lot of dark practices. So we don't understand immunity as anything outside of ukloya or trying to manipulate situations or manipulate life outcomes, and circumstances, and outcomes. You know, there's something that we feel is inherently wrong about it or about using immunity. You know, so in this episode, I'd basically like to go through the very basics of immunity that everyone, whether practicing or not, should know or should at the very least understand about immunity. So where I would like to start is, what exactly is considered Umuthi?
uMkhulu, I think maybe before we get to immunity themselves, Mina, I like to look at life as a relationship between existence and experience. And what I normally refer to existence is what is at the beginning, and beginning can be, anything. For African, spiritualists, they've got their story of creation and what happened after that. For other spiritualists, they've got their own, experience of that. But for me, I look at what exists, and then over time, the relationship between that and time becomes now the experience. So with those two identified, we then look at the role of each element of existence in, and I know when I'm saying, see, now language becomes the thing. When I'm saying to maximize the experience, sounds like what you were talking to in terms of manipulating outcomes. But enmity for me becomes that which we use to enhance the experience of the existence. So how I normally define for the purposes of this conversation, let's use human beings. So you have human beings, abantu, who are then multidimensional beings for me. Multidimensional beings in the sense that they've got their biological bodies, and then they've got other bodies as well. There are energy bodies, there are spirit bodies, and I always say there are bodies outside of these three that we normally identified. These three dimensions, which is body, mind, and soul. And the mind one is a bit of a sort of like hollow point for me, because how we define psychology and mind is different. But we need to get back to your question. So I said there's existence, which I would identify as nature, but nature including human beings, because human beings are also part of nature. And then you have those different types of nature interacting with each other to create experience over time. So for the purposes of enhancing the experience, regardless of the intention or the purpose, we then filter the element of enmity. Yes. At a body level, enmity is plants. Enmity is animals, which we use in our bodies to enhance the experience. Food is for me, the biggest umuthi that is food. Yeah. So you have your body, which is the existence, and then you need to make sure that you have the best body possible to experience life. So you eat. So umuthi then,
and you eat the right things.
Well, the right things are relative.
Very relative.
The right things are relative in that, you mentioned your inclination towards avo. Other people have other inclinations. People take coffee, people don't take coffee. But whatever you take to maximize that experience becomes umuthi for you. And that's when we get to words such as creating the right biochemistry to facilitate maximum experience of life. So you eat the food that will maximize your body so that you can maximize your experience of life. Yeah. So obviously, depending on where you grow up and what is available to you is also a factor. You live in Limpopo, there's food that is present there that is not in the Western Cape. So that becomes then your the food that you have, imithi yakho. And that's why later when we speak to the concept of amadlozi and how they then come to request certain things to be present in your body so that you can experience them, at a higher, dimension. They would ask for those things, not because those things I'm avoiding jumping to the Mpande level. Okay. where you find ukuthi amadlozi come to you and ask for impande ethize. It goes back to, okay, what food did they take for the purposes of maximizing that experience in the past, and how does that then become a prerequisite for you to ingest, so that you experience them at a maximum level? Because food, in essence, even impande, I mean, in the space samadlozi, is food.
Yeah.
Because we don't, sprinkle it around your body, but we put it in your mouth so that it gets to your stomach and it gets digested into your blood. And. So at a body level, ukudla becomes food, becomes umuthi. As we try and then define umuthi, at a simple level.
Yeah.
But then again, as a human being, you have, another body, which is now your mind body. And also there is food in that space as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there umuthi that is specifically for my body? And is there umuthi that is specifically for spiritual well-being?
Sure. In as much as human beings, we have body, physical bodies. We are also spirit bodies. And I know, that part of the conversation becomes a little bit, all over the show, because we all have different definitions of what spirit is. But I don't want to say in India or maybe in the East, but in that part of the world, there's the concept of the energy body being your astral body. Here in this part of the world, we have the concept of uMkhulu, which
I was going to say is tunes, because I've heard that it's also an element of a spiritual body.
Well, is tunes for me is more individual.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more individual. Is the astral body for uVusumuzi.
Okay.
Is tunes sakho. But then uMkhulu becomes the one level up, that then has a relationship with, other easy tunzi and other imiphefumulo that we believe was first your place of existence before you individuated into the person that is uVusumuzi. Hence the belief that you come from somewhere, and then once you have lived this life, you go back to that place. And this is the space of amadlozi. So getting back to the question of, is there imithi for the spirit? I was saying, in as much as human beings have energy bodies, spirit bodies, plants and animals also have that type of dimension as well. Yes. So there are plants that have tunes. There are plants that have souls. There are animals that have that too. And when you take from those, existences as well, and you integrate into impilo kaVusumuzi, then those become imithi for the spirit. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's mostly, I want to call it alchemy.
Yes.
But I don't really know what alchemy is in essence.
Yes.
But I believe alchemy is the interchanging of different types of existences to get the highest
transmutation.
Exactly.
Yes.
So when you take from imithi eyilwane, and imithi eyitshalo, and then you integrate into the person that is uVusumuzi, and then you then get some of those imithi playing at a spiritual level. Maybe if we were to use an example, ibhubesi, lion is considered to be mighty because of the memories that we have of that animal interacting with other animals in the environment around that. We believe that if you take the memory of that animal and integrate into, the life that is uVusumuzi, some of that memory, particularly spiritual memory, will then, facilitate more or less the same type of, memory that it brings from leso silwane leso. So if uzothatha say amafuta ebhubesi, because ibhubesi is mighty in that space, that mightiness would also manifest in Vusi's life. So that becomes umuthi umoya. The animal is not there physically, you just took some of it, you captured some of that spiritual memory, and then you perform your alchemy in the form of a ritual or whatever, and then we believe that lo muthi uzo qamuka or will also manifest spiritually in Vusumuzi's life.
Okay. What you're saying actually is making me think of a question that I hadn't thought of before. So let's say I come to you for a consultation. I have a stomach ache, I have a headache, I have a rash, and then you'll give me, in a Western sense, those and also in an African sense, those ailments will have a name, you have ulcers, you have a migraine, you have whatever, acne, or, those things. What could be wrong with my spirit? What kind of spiritual ailments are there? Because if I come to you and you give me umhlonyane is there's that. I'm assuming that it is predominantly a physical, for the physical body. But what could be wrong with my spirit that umuthi in a spiritual sense will then be alleviating or medicating?
Well, this is where divination becomes a useful tool, because if you come to my space, with physical illnesses that we can see, what divination does, then it helps us to identify: is it a physical, illness purely with a physical root cause, or is there some aspect of spirit uVusumuzi that then is manifesting in a physical illness? For instance, if we divine properly, we should be able to say, no, Vusi just ate something, and this is his response to it. But in the space of ubungoma, we are then able to see if the ulcers are just ulcers physically, or is there a spiritual cause that manifests in a form of ulcers. There are physical illnesses that can have physical symptoms, spiritual illnesses that can have physical symptoms. Most of those, and this is my experience, I mean, if we take the example of an ancestral identity crisis, where the physical body, that is Vusumuzi, is not aligned with the spirit body, that is Vusumuzi. So it means there is identity at a DNA, at a blood level, that does not align with identity at a spirit level. And because your identity is in your blood mostly, and it manifests in your body, so you would look like mama wako or baba wako, or maybe people before them. Then it is in the blood that most of those symptoms would, be visible. So you would suffer physical illnesses that have blood as origin, but then again would give you, other indications. I'm just trying to think of one that would have a physical manifestation. Someone would have hypertension, but only hypertension when they are in certain spaces. Say, for instance, you have an ancestral identity crisis, and in that ancestry, gunezangoma, and each time you're in the presence of izangoma, amadlozi wako would then say, this is how we should be, vibrating. And because physically you have not identified that, when you are in that space, you malfunction, your blood pressure goes up or it goes down. You have anxiety, which is also a chemical misalignment in your blood, and then it triggers a response. But when you are home alone, there's no problem. When you are with your family, there's no problem. It's only when you are with people who are vibrating at that level, and when are you not, that's when it becomes sort of like visible. So some of us would then say how uvusmuzi mayedwa, they withdraw, they become loners, but when they are in this space, something wants to talk, and then physically they get ill. And then as soon as ungena endumbeni, and because amadlozi can see which no, this is a different space, that physical element would then come. And then those of us who are switched on would say, no, I think the problem is not hypertension with uvusmuzi, but amadlozi wake trying to communicate.
So does that mean that if there is such a thing as spiritual illnesses, they are a response to something? It's not like my spiritual body will never just be sick for no reason. Does it always mean that whatever's happening, whatever ailment I'm suffering spiritually is a cause, is a response to something else?
Let's take it back to food. Remember, you were once a tiny baby, right? And it is purely because we gave you food that you grew. But when we give you food that does not agree with you, you don't grow as you're supposed to. Hence things like malnutrition. Malnutrition also exists at a spirit level, where you're supposed to grow in a particular direction, but because you are not spiritually ingesting the right food, then you don't grow accordingly. Obviously, when you are malnutritioned, without responding to anything, you by yourself, you will not, you'll be sick when you are malnutritioned. And we've seen cases where people don't eat the right food, and then certain diseases develop. That's also the case with spirituality.
So you can be susceptible to, you can be spiritually malnourished.
Yes.
And then by consequence be susceptible to certain things.
Yes, and not necessarily in response to. So if we correlate that, it makes a lot of sense. If we correlate that to food, does that then mean, because we eat food every day, 3 times a day, twice, however much, does that mean that we have to use unity spiritually also on a regular basis? Do we have to be having a regimen of, if before breakfast drink this, and before you go to sleep drink that, as a regular part of everyday life? Is that how it should be? There is a recommended daily allowance for spirit, in as much as there is a recommended daily allowance for the body. And I mean, we spoke earlier about how plants and animals have spirit bodies too. So as you eat plants food, they do something to your body, but also their spiritual existence does something to your spirit. Water is one such food that has a lot of, spiritual consequence to your body. Drinking water does something to your body, but it also does something to your spirit. Washing with water does something to your body, but it also does quite a lot for your spirit as well. Maybe to take one example. I mean, we all know much of our physical bodies is water, right? Yeah, and because of that, the more water you take, the more it would be, promoting of good health physically. But also, water has a very dynamic spiritual life. Yeah, water has a very dynamic spiritual life. First, as a facilitator of the flow of energy, because also water is very flowing. So if you are in that space, if you are in water, then it means spirit flows, energy flows, and all of that. But
we should be using iwasho and such things regularly.
Well, first and foremost, water in its pure form. Yeah, ugeza nje kodwa. Taking a bath is a very spiritual practice, and hence most people, after taking a bath, not only do you look much more vibrant, but you feel much more vibrant as well, because water has removed sort of like past energy and has given you has projected you to embrace new energy that comes to you. But to answer your question, we should be using iwasho on a regular basis. Something that people don't recognize a lot, and it's related to water as well, is that most of the things that we use on a regular basis for, say for instance, for bathing, soap, in as much as its preparation might not be as organic as we wish it would be, but there are chemical elements in soap that have sort of like spiritual consequences. You have soaps that have things like lavender. You have soaps that have very cleansing type of properties spiritually. When you would use soap as something to wash with, but you don't realize that in as much as it washes your body, it also washes your spirit. And that's why people who don't wash, don't necessarily have the best energy bodies, because they don't wash, regardless of maybe they might stink or they might not look like someone you want to keep next to you, but spiritually as well, they're not vibrating correctly.
The idea of bathing, even though it sort of falls into the topic of cleansing, and we'll get into that later, for me, my most regular spiritual practice is bathing. I take bathing as a ritual for myself, and it's not something that I can say I consciously did, but it got to a point where after each and every day, no matter how the day was, the one thing that I look forward to is taking a bath. For me, it helps me shift from, I almost want to say, from one state of mind to another state of mind. And I treat that the period of taking a bath consciously. I set, I intend on it being something that helps me. And I think that influences how then the effect of it. So I want to get into this thing of intentions and the psychology of certain things, and talk about why is it that we've always grown up being told that if we use Umuthi, you have to believe that it works for it to work. It's one of those popular, I won't say misconceptions, but it's something that we grew up hearing. And for me, it was one of the things that made me not really buy into the idea of uMkhulu, because I didn't understand why do I have to believe that is going to work for it to work. When I don't have to believe that a Panado works, or I don't have to believe that, whatever that I'm using is going to work. Why is there such a strong correlation between Umuthi and the aspect of belief and the function of psychology as well?
There was something that I was thinking about as you were talking. Oh yeah, the baby experience. With babies, I hope you've had that experience of interacting with a very small baby, where you find that and they would cry or maybe be irritable when they're in a particular state, whether they're hungry or whether they're clean. Babies will always let you know that the energy around me is not okay. Then you take them, you give them a bath. You don't have to believe that the soap or the water is anything good for the baby, but as soon as you bath them, as soon as you feed them, whether you believe the food is good for them or not, all of a sudden they're okay. They sleep. And then the continued practice of bathing the baby then becomes ngakamgezi akalali. But the first few times you did it, there was no belief playing a part in it. You just realized that umntwana uyakhala and mawuthi uyambheka, they're not clean, and they would indicate babies with their mouth movements that they need to eat. Then you bath them, you feed them, and then all of a sudden you get a much more positive response. They are playing, then they eventually sleep. Then at the beginning of it, there was no belief playing part, but as you repeated that practice of bathing and feeding them, then you keep on getting this positive response, which then feeds this belief that whenever they are irritable, if I bath and feed them, then I'm going to get these responses. Not always the case, because sometimes you bath them, you feed them, but they continue to cry. But the consistent repetition of bathing and feeding has given you this response. That's also the case with using enmity, to say at the beginning, some of enmity work whether you believe or not, and we'll get into which ones do and which ones don't. Some of them, they work whether you believe it or not, and the consistent use then creates this belief that I know once I've taken impepo tea, my stomach will be more settled. But in the beginning, your stomach settled whether you believed it or not. But because of the continued use and the outcome that it kept on giving you, then it feeds the part of belief into it. Not all enmity need you to believe. For instance, let's go back to food. And I like the topic of food because most of enmity that we use are in the form of food, whether in pizza that we've cooked or just things that we ingest. But they have to, as soon as they go into your digestive system, for me it's food, right? So you've lived your life, you've eaten certain types of food for a long time, and you've developed, say, the example of ulcers. We know ulcers are an excess of acid in your stomach, and which has taken your stomach pH level to sort of like a lower number, and as a result your stomach linings then start to get damaged, and then you get holes in there, and that's when ulcers come. I know for a fact that if I were to give you food that is pH 7 and above, it would go towards resolving that issue, because it adds more alkaline into your body and therefore reduces acid. And when stomach is alkalinized, it's in a better condition, and not only just your food stomach, but also your stomach linings as well, your colons and all of those things. So if I give you food that is pH 7 and above, it would balance you out, whether you believe it or not, right? So in that instance, belief doesn't play a role. I just give you moringa, I just give you spinach, I just give you more veggies, I just give you more fruit, and then it fixes your stomach, your ulcers are gone. But now, because it has helped you to heal whatever was the problem, without the role of belief in it, the continued use of those foods that would then talk to, I know if I get a certain discomfort in my stomach, and then I take sort of like moringa or spinach juice in the next 30 minutes or so, I'll feel much better and much relieved. So now there's a belief. Someone else comes into your space. They don't have your condition, but they're experiencing the very symptoms. Because of belief, you quickly jump into, let me give them spinach juice. Now belief plays a role in it. And that's how Umuthi and belief kind of have a relationship, because it has helped us in a past situation when we were dealing with a similar thing. Then the belief is that if we apply this type of Umuthi, it will get, sort of like the same outcome. Whereas the recommended approach is always treat, different people like as different cases, and always divine thoroughly when it comes to using uMkhulu. I mean, we haven't gotten to cleansing as yet, but uMkhulu that is believed to be, recommended for use in cleansing. And because of that belief, to say, okay, we know, am I allowed to mention Umuthi names?
Yes. No, actually, should ask you that. How we are allowed to mention.
Well, we can use certain names there and there, but obviously, I mean, there are rituals that are attached to certain metis that are specifically reserved for the space Zobungom. But for the purposes of answering this question, say for instance, we take uMkhulu. uMkhulu is mostly believed ukuthi if kunamanzi amnyama, like a state where either your personal, energy body has been, tempered with to produce bad luck, or maybe that of a family, therefore amanzi amnyama, then you would take uMkhulu as a Umuthi that would cleanse first you, but also at a dlozi level, at a spirit level, obviously combined with amanye amayeza and the ritual, because the ritual is important. So because of that belief, we always think, okay, if there's a case of amanzi amnyama, then we use uMkhulu and this and that, perform this ritual, and then the person will be okay. But then again, that's belief playing into the prescription. The key and the tool that gives you a proper view of what the problem is divination. To look at the case thoroughly, to say, is it just a case of amanzi amnyama, or are there other aspects? Are there spiritual causes to these physical manifestations, or is it just at a physical level?
Okay. So speaking of then those darker afflictions, is there such a thing as bad Umuthi? Like, is Umuthi wrong in itself? Like, because now we're talking about ukuloya, there is that. What role does Umuthi play in those practices? Is it a matter of corrupting the plants, or is there Umuthi vele that is harms people by its very nature?
Earlier you spoke about there was something you mentioned, man, in the last question. Not only belief, but there was something else as well.
Intention,
yes. Intention is very important in the space of healing. But not only for the space of healing, for life in general. Intention is, and I mean, with these words, with this language, there's always preconceived ideas of what intention is, and what intention is in its purest forms, in its purest form. For me, in what intention does, and I'm avoiding defining intention, but what intention does is it says, this is the situation now, this is the situation as we prefer it. Right? So you can take, say for instance, amanzi olwandle. Amanzi olwandle are believed to have high purification powers. And I don't want to get into the specifics, but whenever someone talks about bad luck, the inclination is that if we were to go bath in the sea, that bad luck would go. They don't know why, they don't know how, but that's the belief. And then I take the very same manzolwandle and set a bad intention with it. Because amanzolwandle don't have a sort of like a responsive, property to it, but they follow my intention. They would do exactly what I intend to do. That is the case with enmity as well. Umhlamba amanzi, the one that we mentioned, just by its name, ihlamba amanzi. And I mean, you can use it spiritually, ukugeza idlozi. You can also use it physically, ukugeza igazi. Because it has a hlambing effect. Even if you drink it, it works as a blood tonic. So in that very same way, if I set an intention to say, okay, I'm taking umhlamba amanzi, I want igazi likavusumuzi to be over purified such that the chemical composition is imbalanced. Umuthi would then follow that intention. So it goes back to your question. There are good muti as much as there are bad muti. Some of them are bad by they are very mere existence. Some of them are bad by intention. So ikona enmity that is not supposed to be in the presence of human beings generally. In the same way as if I were to take poison, whether I give it to a man or a woman, whether I give it to a child or an old person, it's going to be poisonous. And if it's fatal poison, it's going to kill you regardless of who you are. There are enmity that are that way. Yes. There are enmity that are very good regardless of who you give it to. One of my favorite is Moringa. Moringa is good regardless. Whether as Mbiza, as something that you take as part of your food, you include in your spinach or in your spices, in your mixture herbs, for eggs, for whatever you put herbs onto, it's good. Because of it's an antioxidant, it's got all of those good properties. But there are enmity emibi in as much as there are enmity emihle.
Sure. So how do I know whether I need Western medicine or Umuthi? Like, how do I, as an individual, when I wake up in the morning and realize that there's something wrong with me, how do I differentiate to say, I need to go see uMkhulu, or I need to go see Dr. Sbanbani? Like, how do I differentiate what kind of medicinal help that I need?
The recent approach, uMkhulu, to healing, and this comes from the need to integrate into our healthcare system. We should remove any prejudices against Western medicine with all that it comes with. So once you do that, then Western medicine becomes a necessary part of healthcare, whether traditional healthcare or modern day healthcare. The important thing that we as Izangoma, or maybe let me say as healthcare providers, and again, I don't want to make it exclusive to ourselves, but even now as an ordinary person out there, you should learn yourself, know yourself, because there are things that you do on a regular basis that would tell you whether you're okay or not. But what the situation you're putting to me is that I wake up today I feel that, I'm not at my best. How do I know whether to go to the clinic or to go to Endumbeni? There are two things for me, and the multidimensional approach becomes important here. Kunokugula komzimba, kunokugula kukamoya. Ukugula komzimba has, physical manifestation, and ukugula kukamoya has that and more. So you must always look for that more part. And for us, that more part would come in a few ways. Yes, unesisu, but you had a dream where you were eating something, and then all of a sudden you wake up with a sore stomach. So for me, that already tells you it's not a clinic problem, it's a Ndumba problem. Those types of examples. You had a dream where, someone broke your neck, and then you woke up with a stiff neck. Or maybe not necessarily violence in your dream, and not necessarily dreams as such. But before you slept, you had a feeling that you were carrying something heavy. Sleep was not coming to you as it normally does. You tossed and turned. And then the following day, you wake up, your whole body is wrong. So obviously, if you look at that, it's not a physical body only type thing. And even with physical body only type things, there's always something extra that tells you. And this is where people hear voices inside them say, no, man, I know it's a sore hand, but something tells me it's bigger than that. Listen to that voice, and that will tell you. And what I normally say is, to cover all corners, start at the clinic, and then is Endumbeni. I always ask when someone says, uMkhulu, I've had this headache. It's okay, what did the doctor say? And even someone who starts Endumbeni with an unexplainable headache, I would say, no, go see a doctor and see what they say, and perhaps maybe take a Panado or an aspirin. So you kind of want to be a comprehensive, you apply a comprehensive approach to it, and don't say one is better than the other.
I always view our prejudiced stance on indigenous medicine in contrast to the extent to which we have actually embraced izangoma as not just healers but also as professionals who are crucial to our spiritual growth as a people and especially as a generation. We have gotten to a point where we are less uncomfortable with speaking about seeking consultations with healers, and we can generally speak openly about our relationship with our ancestors. A lot of credit has to be given to healers who have, in the past 10 years or so, have done a lot in terms of normalizing African spirituality and its practices for our generation. In that sense, I believe that it will take similar strides to begin to demystify Umuthi, and by extension to help to integrate it into a holistic health system whereby we are as comfortable with using indigenous medicine as we are about saying, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. My name is Vusumzi Nlande. Thank you so much for joining me on yet another episode of The Journey Kwantu. I trust that this particular series has been helpful, and I look forward to doing a few more episodes before we wrap it up. And with that, I wish you light, I wish you courage, and I wish you all the very best on your journey. Makwande.